The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Deep right, we got tanks up there. Let's follow a range on deep right. I do have that on the target right now. I've got a couple beams right in front of me. I'm going after it. Right, I got him.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lead Pursuit Podcast. This is Steve, and I am here with everybody's favorite member of the podcast, Brett.
What's happening, everyone?
How are things down there in the Sunshine State?
Man, we're still warm down here. It's in the 80s. We're doing great. Looking forward to some cooler November weather.
And we are also here tonight with our special guest. Some of you might have met him at Gathering of Eagles New Orleans. Always painting cool stuff and just a blood red skies fanatic. Steve Gusky, how are you doing?
Hey guys, I'm doing great. Welcome to everybody out there in podcast land. Thanks for having me on.
And doesn't it make you just mad to hear about Brett talking about his November up here in the Northeast with me?
I'm telling you, brother, I just love it down here where we are in the lovely land of Cleveland with the snow getting ready to come down and hear about the sunshine out there.
Awesome. Well, we have Steve on here tonight, and we are going to be doing another aircraft spotlight episode. And we've been planning this for a few months, but we did not realize that Steve Gusky is the only human being on the planet that still did not have Google Chrome. So we got him upgraded from Netscape 2.0 up to Google Chrome, and we're going to dive into an episode on the P40. But before we do that, let's just talk about what we have in store coming up. So after the disaster that was Crucible in Florida getting canceled from the hurricane, at least for Lead Pursuit Podcast, we're getting some of our hobby mojo back, and you will be able to find Casey at Millennium Con down in Texas on the 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th of November. And he will be doing some Blood Red Sky stuff. So make sure you stop in and see Casey and the Warlord guys down at Millennium Con. I don't know if it's going to be anything official, but he will be at least there, and you can touch base with him. And we also are planning Adepticon. So we know that is still kind of far away, but room assignments, room info is coming out. Events are being planned. There will be some awesome Blood Red Sky stuff. There will be some cool Aeronautica Imperialis stuff. Man, I think we're all getting excited for Adepticon again, aren't we, Brett?
Yeah, man, after not getting a chance to roll some dice and stuff down in Orlando, we're really going to be jonesing come springtime.
Oh, man, and we have, we don't really want to spoil the surprise, but I don't know, you think we have some unique events planned for everybody?
I'm thinking about if I can make it, I want to bring all my Operation Meridian aircraft that I've been collecting over long, warm months of the summer that I was going to show off in Orlando, but the crew from Cleveland is going to try to make it over there.
Excellent.
Remember last year when we went, there was that grinder thing over in, what was that, like the big hall where they were doing
the meat
fantasy
grinder
battle or something? Yeah, meat grinder.
Great.
Are we going to, you think we're going to have something like that for our Gathering of Eagles participants?
I really think that we are going to have a Friday night, I guess for lack of a better term, just like a fun fest, right? Just Blood Red Skies themed, but just really trying to accentuate the fun and the camaraderie and just, the reason we all get together to play games, which is just to have a good time.
You guys think we'll have that tournament going again? Maybe some P38 rules that you were talking about, maybe some changes, but how about a tournament outlook? What do you think?
There will definitely be a tournament. Yeah, and I guess for Adepticon, Any changes to the? Yeah, I mean, man, who knows what the tournament pack's going to bring by Adepticon? It'll be interesting to see what rolls out the first of the year with multi-engine rules. Yeah, man, it's definitely going to be exciting. That's for sure.
Fantastic. That's going to be something to be at. Just if everybody can get down there, we can make up for what didn't happen in Orlando.
And man, what has everybody been working on? Brett, what's on the workbench right now?
Man, I tell you, my hobby mojo has been completely blasted since missing Orlando. I was working really hard getting some stuff ready for that trip, and since that trip was a bust, I haven't picked up a paintbrush since. I still have that Catalina that I need to decal up, and then I've got some Pacific stuff I need to get busy on. I was gonna paint some green Zeros and get my Wildcats all painted, but they're still sitting in the queue. I'm sad to say that I haven't put any paint on them yet.
Man, and Steve, I know you've been working on just I feel like a plethora of aircraft. Just like so what do you got on the table?
Right now, I'm finishing up my 109Ks. I thought I'd get some late war. Everything I have is either 1940 or 41 vintage. I thought I'd go to the end of the war and get some high-powered 109s on the table to match those Mustangs. But I read about the Bulgarian Diatween 520s, and they actually went up against some 38s, and they had rocket pods to knock out some B-17s. So I thought about a scenario or two with those. Plus, I have quite a few more Russians to get together for the I-16s and the I-153s and the I-15s for China. So they will be in Chinese colors. So a lot of little resin airplanes down on my desk.
Man, and isn't that, I know we've talked about this a lot, but isn't that one of the great things about this game? Like you get into a rhythm and you can paint up a ton of airplanes quick, they look good, and man, it's just really easy to buy into this system, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And you can go crazy. And if you can find the airplanes online, plane printer, or at your store, any airplane you're looking for, you can find now. And I think that was one of the drawbacks when it first started. There was just very few airplanes. But now anything you can imagine, you could find, paint up, and put on the table.
Man, you're so right. Just an hour a night. Of course, it's criminal that I haven't been doing any painting in the last few weeks, but just an hour a night, you can get so many planes done so quickly.
I do want to say here, I've been thinking pretty hard and taking some cues from some other hobby people, and we're kind of getting into those like dark days of winter. I'm thinking we might have to do maybe like a midweek, kind of like the virtual happy hour, but maybe like a painting support group, like a 1 hour a week on maybe like a Wednesday night or a Thursday night where we all get together and paint and show what we're painting. I think that it could be kind of like a cool activity to get some people, like you said, Brett, doing that, 1 hour a night, and you can crank out some cool hobby stuff.
And that's all you really have to do. And that's what helped me get that mojo going back, is just a little bit, even if it's just a decal on a plane or the canopy's done, you felt like you did something. And next thing you know, you're working on your next project and your next project. So when it comes time for the conventions, we all get together. We can just put those little airplanes out and have a good time. I'm all for it, though.
Cool, man. Maybe we'll look into that this winter. And before we get into the main topic, any new kit or game aids or products or mats, anything new or cool that's kind of caught you guys? Any new hobby stuff?
Man, I've been seeing a bunch of posts on Facebook, people loving the hobby trays you made up. I saw another one just maybe today. I know, right? Yeah, I'm glad people like them. They're pretty cool. I'm kind of bummed because we didn't get to use them at Crucible. I was like, man, I can't wait to see how this works. But yeah, people are really, really liking those, and that makes me just like super happy. I'm really, really glad people really like those tournament trays. Have you considered doing any kind of like a promotional where, if you get your Blue Falcon hobby airplane tray. What are they called? Forgive me that I'm calling it something.
The tournament tray.
Tournament tray. Okay, yeah. So get your Blue Falcon hobby tournament tray before Black Friday, and you get some free neoprene ship targets or something. Maybe, I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
Free neoprene ship targets. Are you suggesting that we might have a backlog of neoprene ship targets? Is that Is that something that we've talked about before, or like is that just totally off the blue?
I thought you said that there was a big rush for him in the beginning, but maybe it slowed down a little bit. I don't know what the story is
Yeah,
there.
I mean that would definitely be. Yeah, we could do that. I think some Blue Falcon Black Fridays, like BF sales, would be like. I'm thinking this is like a marketing genius that's happening as we're discussing it right here. This could be something.
You mean you're not going to throw those neoprene targets on the floor and have us run for them like little kids at a candy store, like we did at Gathering of Vehicles? I actually have to buy them. Okay, I'm in. I'll do it.
Yeah. How about you? How about you, Steve? Have you seen any like any new kit or anything floating around that you've been liking?
Not a kit, but I do have something I want to look into. I see the ads on Instagram for that battery-powered airbrush, and they show it building or painting a beautiful 148 scale P40, I think. So I'm thinking about getting that so I can take my portable hobby nook wherever I need to. Right now, if I need to go somewhere, I pack up the whole compressor, but I need to find out more about that, get some reviews online to see what it's like. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
It's funny you mention that. I have seen that, and I have been super curious about how that works for the same reason as you. In the ads on Instagram or wherever you're seeing it, the guy is painting like a beautiful model with it. And
Yeah.
man, if you get that, I would be seriously curious into how that works.
I think with some holiday bonus money from work, I might just indulge upon that. Other than that, I'm just looking at Plane Printer and waiting for you guys to put ads out for your new aircraft. And whenever I see that new shiny, I have to have it. So, I sure hope that we can get some of those. What do I tell you about the Fairy Firefly Mark Ones? Boy, anybody wants to do an STL file for that? That'll make a world record purchase for me.
Never, man, you can never have too many airplanes, right? And
Correct.
with that, the main topic tonight is, it's really a plane that doesn't need any introduction. The P40, the Hawk, the Tomahawk, the Kitty Hawk, the War, like whatever you want to call it. A famous airplane, Flying Tigers, Captain Wild Bill Kelso, aircraft spotlight on the P40 coming at you tonight. And let's get into this about the P40. So just, we like to, you all know I'm a big believer in history light. So we're going to kind of chip through some of the history of the aircraft just to give you a little bit of, context for the conversation. We brought Steve on because he's really just, I don't know. I don't think anybody here is an expert on the aircraft, but I know he's a fan of the aircraft. And then we're really going to dig into how this plays in Blood Red Skies. So before we get started, Brett, you want to add anything before we get rolling?
No, man, let's do it. Shark's teeth.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows it. I mean, isn't it like those shark's teeth make it the quintessential cool airplane to like kids and just in pop culture? Like it really is a neat aircraft. So
Right now, those shark teeth are the whole reason people know about the P40. In pop culture, non-World War II related, you can find those shark teeth on jackets, on tennis shoes. They've been used everywhere. And that iconic image of the P40, I think, is what makes it so classic. You talk to the grognards, you talk to the history people, and you find out that, it was a mediocre plane. It really didn't do this or that. And you got to look beyond that because that P40 was something. Nothing says America like that Allison engine. I think I sent you that video of that loud P40 doing a flyby. And you can just tell that's the plane that's going to help us win the war. So if you want to get into it, I can tell you where we're going to start, and that's at the very beginning.
yeah, let's do it. So as I and my, tiny bit of research conducted, so it was basically began development because it was really just apparent that the P-36 was not going to get it done.
And that's correct. Yeah, P-36 came out. It was the U.S. standard fighter at the time. The Curtiss Wright Aircraft Company came up with this great idea. This plane, although it was the backbone of U.S. aviation for a short amount of time, the U.S. government knew that with the war drums sounding on the horizon, they needed to put out something to get another fighter in production. And they put out the bids for it. Some of the other aircraft that we all know and love, the Lockheed Lightning, even the Bell P-39 Airacobra, they were quote unquote better, but they just didn't have the they were too technologically advanced. They didn't have that speed of construction of getting it out there that Curtiss was able to do by taking that standard P-36 and modifying it to meet the restrictions that the U.S. were looking for. They easily won that contract. And do you know how much that contract was for in 1939, 1938? It was $13 million to build their aircraft for the U.S. government. You do that today, and I ran out of zeros. I tried to figure out what it would be. It's like $258 million. So they took that $13 million contract and started with the P40 Bs and Cs.
Awesome. So there is, I'm glad you mentioned the Bs, the Cs, because there is a lot. It comes up every once in a while on the Ready Room. What was this aircraft called? So I have found it called everything from just the Hawk, or versions of it called the Hawk, the Tomahawk, the Kitty Hawk, the Warhawk, and I think that's it. So what, explain to me
Sure.
the naming convention of this aircraft.
The Kitty Hawk was primarily what they wanted to call the P-40 Bs and Cs. So we had the Curtiss Hawk, and then they came out with the plane that won the contract, which we now know as the Tomahawk, which, of course, in the U.S. nomenclature, they had the P-40 or the Hawk 81, the Hawk 85, the Hawk 87. They use numbers to represent their Hawks. The names are a lot easier. To make it real simple, the Tomahawks were the early Bs and C versions. The British took them, and they went to combat, I believe, in December 1941, and they christened them the Tomahawk. That's where that name stuck. When the E came out, which had the larger engine, different airframe, different gun arrangement, it was called the Kitty Hawk. And different versions of that, different sub versions were the Kitty Hawk Mark I, Mark IIA. And then when the U.S. got a hold of it and we came up with the definitive version, even though there were about, 13,000 built during the war, the version that was the most produced was the P40N. We like to call that the Warhawk. And Blood Red Skies terms, we could get lost with all the different nomenclatures, different versions, but let's just call it Tomahawk was the early Flying Tigers version. The Kitty Hawk is the 49th Fighter Group, the main P40E. The Warhawk, we'll just call the P40N for simplest sake.
Sweet, that's awesome. And as we dive into some of the different models here, I found it really fascinating with the P40 because a lot of times when you look at different aircraft and the different models as it evolves through its life, there are internal changes, there are new engines, there are new superchargers, new armament, stuff like that. But if you look at something like the 109, the core airframe and structure and shape and design of the plane didn't really change. When you look at the P40, from the early models to the later models, there are some pretty substantial, noticeable, really like airframe changes to this aircraft. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the biggest feature that to tell these different versions. The engines, the air coolers, the supercharger, although it was never a two-stage supercharger, they tried to make it better and it fit in different areas of the aircraft, changing the overall look. The other aspect is the stability and the control of the aircraft. They had to extend the tail. That was a P40F. They actually tried a different engine. They tried to put the Packard Merlin into that P40F. That changed the looks. So the outside of the P40 changed, and it takes a while to look at it to really see those differences, as opposed to like the 109, the early E's had the square wings. As soon as they went to the F's and later, you see the rounded wings. The little details of those aircraft really show themselves once you start researching it. You can instantly see the different types of tails or the air cooler or the wing loadout of weapons. But boy, there were a lot of changes. You can go crazy going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's really, the later versions, when you look at them, they just have just such a cool look. Like you said, they got a little longer. They got like a little bigger, air intake on the fronts of them. I mean, it really became a really nice looking airplane. That front intake on the top got a little more sleek and conformal to the body. Just a really neat looking airplane. And man, Brett, how we tracking here for you? You able to hang on to this?
Yeah, man, I'm picking it up. It sounds pretty good. I was reading somewhere that that iconic shark's mouth feature might have been borrowed from pilots that saw German aircraft, or maybe 110s in Africa or something, and maybe borrowed that because it looked cool on their aircraft. And it reminds me that, when I think of the P40, I always think of like China, Burma, India theater. And I forget that Africa, North Africa campaign was the place where they first saw service.
That's correct. Now, to go back to the shark mouth, I think the guys on 112 Squadron, the main RAF squadron that had the Tomahawk, the P40C version, somewhere they saw in a magazine the 110s of ZG 2676. These numbers get mixed up after a while, but they had the shark mouth, and you can see that at any 110. You can look it up on the internet and find it. Well, the guys over at the AVG saw the 112 squadron, thought that'd be really great, and we can put that on our aircraft. And they wanted to install this superstition nature of the Japanese pilots with this flying dragon, and not only that, but also their tenacity in the air, their aggressiveness, led them to be called the Flying Tigers. So that shark mouth started with the German 110s, like you said, the ones that flew over France and over Belgium in the early stages of the war, and even in the Battle of Britain. 112 Squadron took it for theirs, and a legend was made.
Now, just as far as we touched on it there a little bit, the operational history of the aircraft. We all know about the Flying Tigers, right? I mean, P40 Flying Tigers, basically like those two things are synonymous with each other. But there were other countries and air forces besides the United States and England that use these. So I think Russia was one. Was there anybody else that like Lend-Lease stuff with these aircrafts?
Yes, there was, and we could go to just about every country, every allied country flew with the P40 in some version. The Russians had them. They didn't really treat them nice. They ran them at emergency power all the time. The harsh climate really took a toll on all the equipment. And a funny note about the Russians, any P40B that we have now that we're restoring in present day seems to always come from a bog in Russia. I don't know if you ever looked into that. Anything that breaks down, we find it, we bring it back, and we build it.
And I think Australia flew them, right? They flew them down in Australia a little bit, New Zealand. They really did get around a little bit, right?
Right. Now, we can even go to the Australian, use them a little bit more. Oh, gosh. They were desperate for aircraft. And when we sent the P40Es over to them, number 75 Squadron really took the war to the Japanese and was one bright spot during those early dark days. 75 Squadron helped defend Darwin. And then, of course, about Milne Bay. And in Australia, they look at Milne Bay as the British do for the Battle of Britain. The P40s really saved the day with their close air support. They're attacking Japanese aircraft, ships, anything that moved. That really helped defend Australia from that tide that nobody else could stop.
Man, and it's probably just my my self-admitted own ignorance about World War II, but I very easily forget that there were some like substantial World War II actions that happened down like in that Australia area. It's kind of almost like a forgotten theater, at least to me.
It is, but at the same time, it's one that shows the desperation and why the P40 was actually so needed during the first part of World War II. They needed an aircraft that could get out there. We needed the numbers. They didn't have the luxury of taking the time to research the airframe or the engine to make it better. Now, remember when the P40Bs first came out, the government said that we want an airplane that can only fly around 15,000 feet. That's all we need. They didn't think of high altitude performance. So the 15,000 feet and below, that's That's something that they could really use to defend the coastal region of the United States. We didn't have time to look at a supercharger. We just wanted to get this airplane available. And by doing that, we did have the numbers available to send it over to Australia to help them. The Australians used those P40s to the extent that they found the good of the airframe. They found the strength of the airplane, and they used it to the best of their ability, almost to the fact where they came up with different tactics. And the higher ups of the Royal Australian Air Force were kind of mad that they weren't actually going to dogfight. The pilots knew they couldn't mix with the Zeros and the Oscars and the other Japanese aircraft at the time. They knew slashing attacks worked. When they were told to turn around and fight on a one-on-one situation, a turning dogfight, they lost some really good heroes. They lost some really good pilots. But they did hold the line, and they did fight back as best as they could.
So then, operationally, this aircraft, it's not something, I mean, maybe it is, I don't know, I'm just kind of spitballing. It was towards the later years of the war, kind of got outclassed by the newer fighters. It's not something like the 109 that you're going to see like revised, and then like flying into the 50s with some air forces, right? By the end of the war, the P40 was kind of like obsolete and we were moving on. It served its purpose. It was a great aircraft, but it was, new technology kind of passed it by.
That's true. And some were actually used by other air forces as trainers in the early 50s. But production stopped in 44. The end model that we talked about was the ultimate of the P40 variants, the one they build the most. And of course, it saw most action in CBI theater, which is where, technological advances didn't really hit as fast as they did, let's say, on the Western Front or through Sicily and Italy up into Southern Europe. But the P40s did soldier on. They were a great ground pounder. They became great at close air support, and they were needed. And the P40 did its best they used them as best as they could. And that's why when you see those P40Ns, the 80th Fighter Group, I believe, with the giant skull from the CBI theater, they really took the fight to the Japanese all the way up to, I think it was late 44. So they didn't advance as fast as the others, but what they did do is hold the line with their toughness and their ability to be a great ground attack aircraft.
Awesome.
You mentioned their toughness. I understand they have a reputation for being not only pretty well armored in that, but also pretty easy to maintain, perhaps?
Yes, that was another aspect. They were so easy to get. Well, once again, in the war of attrition, we had the supplies. We could give new aircraft, new parts. They didn't last long in Russia because of the weather I talked about, and the winters were bad, and they slowly said, no, we don't like these, and put them off to just help out with convoy protection. But they were easy to fix. They were easy to get back up and running, and a lot of pilots came home because of the toughness of that P40. One of the leading aces, the number one P40 ace was Clive Caldwell, and he had an incident where his plane was shot up by 2 or 3 109s, and they don't know how he did it, but he did manage to get back. And there were all kind of reports of P40s colliding with other aircraft, wings missing, 3 feet of wings missing, and they made it back home. They got the pilots home safe, and they were easy to maintain enough to help us hold off till the newer aircraft like the 38s and P51s came online.
I gather it was it wasn't super sophisticated in some of its control surfaces and other things, but as far as like maybe negative aspects of the aircraft, I guess it was, comparatively slow, didn't have really great climb or high altitude performance. I think you kind of touched on that. Does that kind of encompass the main maybe negative things about that aircraft?
Yeah, it was. You got to remember the engine company, the Merlin, their primary engine source. It was a small company. They didn't have time to research for the superchargers that were needed. It was a single stage supercharger. Once again, not good at high altitude. Didn't have a great climb. It was a heavy fighter. This is what really held it back. But they were able to find out that the speed in the dive, the toughness and the stability at lower levels is what they needed. But they just couldn't get that time spent to develop the newer engines. And the Rolls-Royce Merlin was put in for the F, like we talked about, and that was a great aircraft. That was a chance for the P40F and the P40 series in general to really go in a different branch and be very successful. But then again, the Mustang came up, and the Merlin people said, we got to work on this airframe. We're going to take those engines back, and they switched back to the Packard Merlin, or the original engine, I'm sorry, to power their P40s, and it just went back to where it was, a low-level fighter that can never really attain altitude. And that's why you never saw it on the Western Front, because the higher altitude battles, the P40 just couldn't compete. Just mainly a ground pounder and a good defensive fighter to go after the bombers, go after ground targets, like we said many times. It's a strong airframe.
Man, that's excellent stuff. And Brett, I'm gonna kick it to you for this one, man. Let's see if you can come up with any notable aces or squadrons besides the Flying Tigers, like some notable pilots or squadrons that use the P40.
I wrote that card for Wild Bill Kelso. Does that count?
Hey, it counts to me, man. Absolutely.
That guy's my hero, and that's what got the P40 into my system. Is when you saw 1941. I actually saw it at the cinema a couple times. What a great shot of that P40 coming in. And if I get one of those leather jackets and a cigar and that hat, maybe that's what I'll wear to Adepticon.
Well, there's some serious aces though that flew the P40, right? Did
Sure.
Tex Hill fly the P40?
Yes, he did. He flew the B model in the Flying Tigers. He stayed on after the Flying Tigers were absorbed into the U.S. Air Force, and he flew the P40E and eventually took command of the 23rd Fighter Group. And he was a tough old bird. He really knew how to take that P40 and get the best out of it.
And famous Black Sheep, Pappy Boyington, first kills in a P40, correct?
Correct. He had his kills in the AVG. A lot of people, I don't know if you're aware of that, but he started with the AVGs, and he went back to Corsair fame with 214. But he did cut his teeth on the P40 Bs and Cs of the AVG.
So I have to ask, since you brought up Wild Bill Kelso, fictional P40 pilots, who wins in a dogfight? Wild Bill Kelso or Captain Rafe Macaulay from Pearl Harbor? Who wins?
Oh, dear God. You got to bring up Pearl Harbor. We made a pact in our gaming group in Columbus. We would never bring that abomination of a movie up. I'm going to have to say Wild Bill Kelso.
I don't know, Brett. Who you got?
I'm just picturing Wild Bill like breaking off a beer bottle and flying close and maybe throwing it at his opponent or something crazy, or maybe they both crash and then it turns into a fist fight and maybe cuts him with said bottle. I don't know.
Man, I don't know. It'd be interesting. Maybe we need to hire somebody to write some fan fiction or something like that to kind of like flesh out that scenario. It might be an interesting read.
I don't know. It might be kind of hard. It took Wild Bill quite a bit of ammunition to take down that Lockheed Electra. He wasn't really hitting the vital systems, I don't think, whatever that twin-engine plane was. But the other one is the Sky Captains in the World of Tomorrow. You're missing, who is that, Jude Law, who was in that movie back from the early 90s or early 2000s, that pulp sci-fi. Do you guys remember that?
Is there a P40 in that?
Yeah, he flew a P40, and it was like a two-seater P40, and it was just, you can Google it when we leave. You can watch some clips online. Pretty, it was really pulpy, but I don't think a P40, it probably had more realistic flight envelope than Pearl Harbor did. I don't understand that movie.
I'm sure I have no doubt that somebody on the Ready Room will listen to this and validate or invalidate your comments about the fictional flight envelope of the P40. So stand by for those comments, I'm sure.
I can't wait. My friend in Columbus, Jim, the super pilot extraordinaire, he'll start sending me the links. Oh, they said this about the P40. They love Sky Captains. Why are you pissing people off? I don't know. That's just how I roll.
So as far that's awesome. And I've always liked these aircraft spotlight episodes, and we really need to do more of them because it kind of lets people at least learn a little something about the aircraft and maybe learn something new. And if nothing else, it kind of gets you looking like just for paint jobs or cool things to do with your P40s, right?
Right.
But
And
let's talk about
hold on 1 second. Hold on. You got to talk about, I know you got an idea, you got a plan here, but you just mentioned paint scheme. I don't want to go without saying this. The
Let's hear it.
P40 is the most beautiful aircraft to paint up. The decals for the P40 available online from Blue Falcon Miniatures, from Miscellaneous Miniatures, from all over the net. You can find beautiful P40 from the giant skull from the Burma Banshees to the decorative different color schemes from the 49th Fighter Group. Even the 112 Squadron Sharkmouth for the early Bs and Cs. These are probably the best aircraft to paint up if you really want to show off on the table. Sorry, I had to steal your thunder there.
No, it's good. And, I mean, even, man, I could be wrong, but 325th had some checker tail P40s, right?
They did, but they were the F version. Somebody needs to come up with an STL for the F, and that's when we were talking earlier in the show about the different looks. The P40F is just as different when you look at it compared to the E as the P40B is when you look at it compared to the E. They stretched that nose out, they stretched the tail out, they got rid of the air scoop up top, and if you can find a decent P40F, right now the P40F is the holy grail of aircraft we are looking for, both for Blood Red Skies and also for Mustangs, Messerschmitts, the 172nd scale game that I play. The 325th Checker Tail really made a name for themselves. They were the equivalent of the 112 Squadron as RAF, or the equivalent to the 75 Squadron for Australia that we talked about. They took that P40, they took the fight to the Germans. Herky Green was a famous pilot that flew, and you could have a lot of fun if you take your P40Fs. Unfortunately, in the game, I don't think we have stats for the F. We just have the B, E, and N. Sorry to throw all these names out. But if we can come up with something for the F or get them on the table, they had the checker tails on to let the B-17s know they were an Allied fighter. That's where that came from. So they are a gorgeous aircraft. A long-winded answer to say yes, the 325th took that P40 to the Axis as hard as they could.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, just some great paint jobs on P40s besides the iconic shark's mouth. Like, there's just, man, if you're into painting, the P40s do look great. So now into Blood Red Skies, different versions, how it plays. And I'm interested to dive into this aircraft. Is this good stats, bad stats, typical, kind of like Nerf fest of a UF airplane, Nerf or nothing? So let's talk about them a little bit. And like you said, we're going to start with the early version. P40B, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what you said earlier, this is a Tomahawk? Kitty Hawk?
It would be a Tomahawk. We'll go with Tomahawk. Yep.
So we're going to say P40B Tomahawk, speed 7, 2 agility, 1 firepower, great dive, robust, does come with poor quality, but the bargain basement of 24 points. So we have a 7-2-1 aircraft, great dive and robust. We've kind of already said poor quality. We're not really caring about it. Gives us that bargain basement of 24 points. How you feeling about that, Brett?
Man, that's a really low price. And speed 7's not terrible. Agility 2 is not terrible. I don't know. It's worth considering. And I think I've been beaten on the table by these. I think it might have been P40Bs.
Really?
At a GOE.
Wow.
Man, so I'm looking at the B now, and 24 points. So it's an alternative aircraft to like the Yak Swarmfest, right? You are getting hit with the 1 firepower. It is a speed 7, and with that great dive, it's giving you that extra boost of speed. Like, is this one case where at 24 points, great dive is kind of helping you out a little bit here? Like, we're actually kind of in favor of this great dive, maybe?
I think maybe, check me if I'm wrong, but maybe like the real thing, you might want to play this really aggressively if you had kind of a swarm of them going.
What this sounds like to me is like the P40 being designed and then actually getting into combat. And the pilots are saying, wow, this airplane's pretty good. It's like what you guys are doing right now. Once you're looking at it, get it out there, get it on the table, you can see the bonus with it. I like that great dive. I think a couple episodes ago, I think Dr. Glover didn't like that great dive too much. I'm finding that to be a really useful way to get out of dodge, circle around, and come back.
You could pair this with low altitude performance and feel good about it from a historical standpoint, and get to exploit that great dive with it and probably play it fairly effectively with Speed 7. I think throw in some great dive and do those quote unquote slashing attacks where you're just flying in, fighting the fight on your on your terms, and then getting the heck out of dodge and turning around, coming back at it if you can.
What I found best with great dive and in all the P40 variants that I've played, if you're going up against the bombers, any kind of bomber intercept, you can get past the fighters with that great dive to come around and get behind the bombers and start pecking at them. No matter, with your firepower of 1, I take superior armament to get that extra die. Although I always lose it halfway through the game, I can't make that pilot skill. But still, I find that great dive allows you to get past the fighters, zoom around, and make the mission happen.
Man, I'm kind of intrigued by this now. And originally I really wasn't. But, poor quality, are we all kind of in agreement that at least if you're in a list building standpoint, that we're really not concerned with poor quality at this point? Have we all agreed on that?
Agreed. Yeah, I don't see that as a detriment, because unless you're getting to combat first turn, if somebody can zoom ahead and get that shot at extra range, I forget what card that is, poor quality is really nothing.
Brett, how you kind of in the same boat as that? Poor quality, like no concern with that?
Yeah, I tend to agree that poor quality can be mitigated, especially if you've got clouds on the tables or those kind of things. I don't think it's going to be a terrible thing. Now, if this is all assuming we're playing, what is it?
Open deck.
Well, the fight, what is it? I can't remember.
Oh, dogfight.
Dogfight, yeah. I was going to say fighter sweep, and I knew that wasn't right.
Right.
Yeah, the dogfight scenario. I wonder how much that would be of a concern if that kind of paradigm changed. If we had a different starting setup, different deployment setup. But with dogfight, I think, I'm not too concerned about poor quality.
Is there any setup that you guys have combat turn 1? I mean, is that scenario driven? Is there any, we kind of just put the airplanes on the table and have fun or make up our own scenario as we go. But is there something where you could be worried about that poor quality? Or
I think if you were playing the bounced scenario and you were the defender with P40s, or any poor quality, if you're a defender with any poor quality aircraft, it could be in a very, very bad spot in that bounce scenario. Other than that, I think deployment happens far enough away that there would really have to be something kind of go wrong to have combat that first turn.
Is there any relevance to any kind of deployment high cover shenanigans that would make poor quality maybe a little risky?
Yeah, I don't know, because if you're doing a high cover shenanigan, your planes aren't coming in that first turn anyway. They would come in at the end of the first turn, and then you wouldn't be able to even use them until the second turn. So I don't know that would really affect anything in just the way I'm kind of thinking about it in my mind.
Yeah, even without without regard, I mean, you have at least one chance to climb beyond disadvantage. So yeah.
I mean, I guess if you were playing somebody who had a great climb card and they could kind of block you from doing that first turn, right? That could certainly play into effect there. So I guess there are ways, but I don't think for the bargain basement of what was it, 24 points, that I'm gonna be worrying about that. That plane's actually intriguing me a lot more now, talking about it here, than it really ever did. I'm kind of discovering it here in my mind for the first time.
Right, and if you did have that poor quality, you could hit low and slow. There are many anecdotes from World War II of P40s getting hit before they get into position, and vice versa. They hit the 109s, which the later model 109s were heavy, and they couldn't really get into the as fast as the F version. The Gs were really heavy, I should say. They couldn't get into position fast enough, and the P40s could jump them. But I think we're kind of beating a dead horse where the poor quality, for that price of 24, take as many as you can get and don't worry about it.
Sweet. And then if we move on to the E model, I would say this is your kind of standard fare. It's 7 speed, 2 agility, 2 firepower, 722 with great dive and robust at 34 points. So 722, great dive, robust, 34 points. How are we feeling about that?
I'm kind of comparing that to the 109E, I think, from a price standpoint. I think that's right there. And I like the great dive. I've always enjoyed playing that. You're going to give up great climb, but robust is a pretty good card to have. I mean, it just depends on play style, but I think it could get you out of some jams and afford you to play pretty aggressively, like I was thinking with the P40B. Of course, don't have the same price, but 34 points is still, it seems to me like the break point is right around 38 points. So if you're below that, and that's just my perspective from playing 109s a lot, so that 34 points for the P40E seems to be a little on the lower price side. I kind of like it.
And that's why I like that 2 for firepower. I know it's just one die. I know you're just rolling one more die when you're going after your target, but that 2 firepower for me makes all the difference. And robust has saved me more times than not. So 34 points, if you're saying that's equal to the 109, is that the E109 you're talking? I don't have that sheet up, but if it is any version of the 109 under the, well, there's only the E, do we have the 109F stats also here?
Yeah, we have those. I think the E is 34 points. I'm just going off memory, but you can check me and see how I'm on that. But
it's just a great stat for an airplane you can flood the field with. You got to watch your pilot skills, when you're going to pick that tournament list, if you're going to use that. But all in all, I have found that P40E just to be fun with that great dive. Robust really throws it off. If you're going historically against Japanese players, of course, they got flammable, or what is that, vulnerable, sorry, and that really helps out. So the P40 really starts standing on its own, and you can do that, let me hear your guns from 1941, and everybody just has a good time around the table.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with you that 2 firepower to me is basically essential when list building. It just is a game changer. And Brett, man, you just touched on something kind of mathematically that I want to talk about here when we talk about the N. And I know I said mathematically, so people are like, ready to laugh and point and get out their calculators and check me here. The P40N is coming in at, it's a speed 8, so you're bumping up your speed, 2 agility, 2 firepower, same stats, great dive, and robust at 38 points. So for 4 points more, it's the same aircraft, but you're getting that 1 extra speed. So where are you feeling about, where are you feeling between that 38 to 34 points?
Well, 38, I was saying 38, I think is around my break point. I pulled up my German stat cards, and, I like to play the 109G, and that's a 37-point aircraft. And it's a considerable upgrade in my mind from the 109E, which is 31 points, but does not have the kind of firepower we were talking about in some of the other aircraft. So I think price-wise, 38, I think we're kind of right around the same ballpark that I'm used to playing. I'm used to playing a 228 aircraft with 2 traits. What's the agility again on the?
It is an 822. It's that 228 or 822 like you were talking about there. So it's
right.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, I am gonna. So it's interesting here when we talk about these stats, right? The price to add 1 pilot skill to your squadron is 25 points, right? So to take any 1 pilot and up them 1 skill level is 25 points. Now, if you consider that the average list is 6 aircraft, right?
Right.
34 to 38 points, that's only freeing up 24 points. So switching 6 aircraft at 4 points per aircraft is only freeing up 24 points, which isn't even enough to increase one pilot skill. So is there any reason at all to take a 722 at 34 points compared to an 822 at 38 points? I'm feeling like it's not even giving you a pilot skill. Like, what would the advantage be? Maybe squeeze in a named ace potentially?
Well, I think it's all about narrative, though. You're making a point. You want to take the end. You want to try to squeeze the best pilot combination. And I'm sure Don has already done that. We'll probably see it now if he hears this video and wants to show what he knows about the P40 at the next tournament. But at the same time, if you're doing something narrative and you are in the South Pacific in 1943, I don't think any tournament's really going by that. We're just taking whatever airplane works. But there's no real, I mean, take the end, try to get as many good pilots in. I don't think a named ace would help you. You want to keep it as low as possible to get that additional airplane in. What have you seen tournament lists at? Is it typically 6 aircraft, or have you seen less? Because when I was going to do my G55s, I had enough points for just 5 aircraft with 1 ace. But what do you think you would do with the N? 2 aces, or you want to stick with the E?
Man, I think with the N, I would do the standard 6 aircraft and just like spitballing off the top of my head. Probably no ace, a couple 4s, a couple 3s, a couple 2s would probably get it under the points. But I feel like that's kind of the standard is the 6 aircraft. But, you know, honestly, recently the creativity has come out and there's been a lot of people having success with less aircraft. That's for sure. The game has certainly evolved in that aspect. I feel like I've definitely noticed that.
I was thinking I would probably play it a lot the way I play the BF-109G, and it's really just about the same stats and same points. But what I would do differently is I would probably play more defensive traits to try to maximize what you're getting from the robust and play the great dive defensively with low altitude performance. Yeah, it's kind of defensive in my mind. That's
Okay.
probably what I would do. Whereas I feel like what's a little funky about the 109 is that it's you got this offensive thing and a defensive thing, if you will, and so it's tough to like lean all in one aspect of that. I think if I was playing the N, I'd probably build a list a lot like my 109G list, but I would intentionally try to be more defensive and just look for opportunities to fly by real fast, get some shots in, but not get decisively engaged, right? Like get out of there, try to dive away, and then turn around and come back in and take shots where I can.
That's pretty good to try that, make it as defensive as you can. You really play into the strengths of what the P40 was. And I don't think this game can really point out the differences in the 109G compared to the P40. I know some of the ends, I think that was a Kitty Hawk Mark III in British terms, or the Mark IV. It did fight some 109Gs near the end of its air-to-air roll until it became strictly a ground pounder. But it fared okay when it had the position like we talked about. In the scope of the game that Blood Red Skies is, I think I would take that end just to get that robust, and that would mitigate. 109 would use their great dive, of course, to help out, but that robust would really help out in a lot of situations as an allied player.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that robust trait is you can play it a little bit more aggressively on the offensive side, and if you kind of get in a spot, that robust is going to bail you out 1 or 2 times throughout the course of the game, you know? So it's like you can be a little more aggressive than you would if it didn't have that robust trait. That might lead to some interesting stuff.
Yeah, maybe squeeze an ace in there with tough.
Wow, yeah, that would really be good.
You know, like I said, you're really leaning into one aspect. You know, you got one thing that's, you know, well, one thing, I mean, one aspect. I look at great dive as being, if you combine that with low altitude performance and this speed of 8, you could really get out of trouble potentially, even if you're at disadvantage, right? So that's defensive in my mind. Of course, robust, I think we could all say that's a defensive trait. So, okay, let's just maximize that, like to exploit that to the max. Then I'm thinking maybe I'm going to do a ace that has a defensive trait and just try to outlast and then if I can pitch out of the you know the scrum and come back at it from another angle, then take shots where I can, but just keep flying out of the big tangle of the big fur ball in the middle of the table. Just keep flying through that, shooting as I go. Maybe I'll get some, avoid getting hurt too bad myself and inflict some boom chits on my opponent. That's probably how I try to fly it. I've done that with some success with the G's, and the G's aren't as defensive as this idea could be. So just using that great dive tactic and that firepower of 2 to do what I'm describing, kind of zipping back and forth across the table. My best games and probably my most decisive wins have been where I've been able to fly like that in the game. And I think this stat line and trait line could have some real potential in that type of gameplay if you enjoy it that way.
Yeah, like I said, I honestly haven't really given a thought to this aircraft, but man, the more I look at these stats, I'm liking it, and I'm kind of thinking like, stats are cool, looks awesome on the table, some great paint jobs. Man, there might be some P40s in my future. Now these stats, like it sounds like we're all in agreement that we feel like these stats are actually pretty indicative of the real life aircraft.
I think so. I heard some stories about how they were so well armored that pilots would intentionally do head-on shots because they felt like they could take it. And maybe with robust, that's the kind of thing that you could do and plan to get away with it.
Now that we've talked about these traits and we've talked about the stats of these aircraft and we've looked into them a little bit, are we going to actually kind of tip our caps and say, man, they got it right? These are decent stats. Not only are they decent stats, the great dive fits. These stats are indicative of what a historically accurate P40 should fly like in this game. Do we have to kind of eat our words here a little bit with this U.S. aircraft?
I think you're right. I think that they are statted right. I think the great dive works. I like it. And just hearing Brett wanting to change things around a bit and explore the defensive nature, I think they are statted correct.
Yeah, how about you, Brett? What are you thinking?
Yeah, it seems like, I'm no expert, but it seems like what I've read and stuff about their performance, robust and great dive are really appropriate. And, I think I don't see a whole lot of other traits historically that, it's not a lot to go to add to it. It's not like if we were making a card today, that there would be a lot of other things we'd want to bolt on there. I think this is a pretty clean description, I think, of what you get, and it looks like it could be a lot of fun to play.
I am definitely going to, like I said, tip my cat on this one. Tip my cat. I am going to tip my cap on this one. And, it's right. They did it. It's a good, solid American aircraft that's accurate. I think it'd be fun. And, this is it. I'm happy.
I think if you mix in the theater cards, maybe superior armament, pick some other fun ones, even more joy out of the P40.
Yeah, I could see some of these in my future. I'm liking the paint scheme. I'm liking the traits. I'm liking the stats. I'm liking the points. I think I'm a believer. I think I'm going to see some P40s in my future. And, man, I got to tell you, Steve, I really enjoyed this. We've been going for over an hour here about the P40. I learned a ton, man. You're super knowledgeable about it. It was great. Is there anything you want to add on the P40 before we head out?
Just that if you're looking for some decent models, check out Lead Pursuit Store. You'll find some beautiful kits and build them up, paint them, bring them to Adepticon.
Nice. Brett, anything you want to add before we sign off here?
No, I really appreciate this deep dive. I think I am kind of interested in these for their simplicity. I feel like any of these really kind of support, especially the P40N, really seem familiar to my typical way I like to play, and might even be a more simple option. Without as many different things going on, I could really focus on one aspect of gameplay with this. It could make it a lot of fun.
Yeah, I am, Brett, I'm with you. I'm really liking it. I'm enjoying it. So, man, with that, Steve, thanks again. It was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed it. Brett, as always, is a pleasure. And we are trying, always on the lookout for some new catchy sign-off phrase. But for tonight, we're going to go with, may you always be advantaged. Thanks for listening to Lead Pursuit Podcast.
That idea of 3 pick 2 is kind of exciting. And then you as a player, kind of get, depending on, I don't know, how you intend to play the game, that mission, you might exploit something differently from one game to the next. I don't know.
No, it's a good idea.
I'm not sure exactly how that would play out, but I thought it really sparked my interest when I heard that.
So that is a good idea, but it has one fatal flaw to it, and that is the fact that somebody in America thought of it, so it will never be in Blood Red Skies.
Curses.